Yeah,
Dan.
yeah, we're going to go ahead and kick things off here. All right, so for this week's WTF, I have Seth Earby. If am I pronouncing it correctly?
Irby, but yeah.
Irby. Okay, we've got Seth Earby, and Seth helps companies from a planning, implementation, and evaluation perspective for Copilot effectiveness. He's helping many clients start their data security posture management for internal use in preparation for multiple users for secure Copilot implementation. And as we've talked on many of our calls, one of the things when it comes to Copilot is just that readiness and preparation because there could be sensitive data that's out there. Just the overall organizational structure of the data that's out there might not be where it needs to be. And it's just one of the first steps as we continue to have those conversations with our clients about Copilot and just leveraging the tool and the power that Copilot offers. And with that being said, I'm going to introduce Seth. I'm going to have him give us a introduction of himself, if you don't mind, and then we'll kick things off for about 15 minutes or so, just typical format, and then we'll just open it up to Q&A. And I do have a variety of questions that are lined up as well. So with that being said, here is Seth.
Oh, thanks for that, Dan. Yeah, so as Dan mentioned, Seth Earby, principal consultant. Really, I specialize in M365 security, and really most of it around is like the modern work environment, right? So doing Microsoft Intune, Microsoft Intro Security, basically hybrid cloud, full cloud, transitions and work management for my clients as well as helping MSP partners. So kind of in scope of that, right? We'll just kind of bust right into it. Um, Starting off, WTF's Copilot, right? One of the main things that I think was the reason of having these conversations, right, is Gen AI, right? The Claudes, the Chat GPT, Grok, Gemini. There's tons of them nowadays. They are very valuable tools. I mean, I think Mike, you were just talking about, from I don't know the whole context, but generating slides, generating images, generating content, and everything, in a way that just completely transforms the work that we used to know. And that is such a valuable tool, but it does leave a lot of unknowns and questions on the table, right? Around data privacy and confidentiality. And there's a lot of value that can be delivered via Copilot if it's managed and secured properly. But one of the main things that I believe is when we're having a conversation of using 365 versus Claude or ChatGPT, and I'll be the first to defend it and spot its weaknesses. Right? I do believe that there are models, and there's constantly going to be developed. Nobody's going to ever have first place very long in this type of environment, right? And I think a lot of times I've heard criticisms is, oh, well, Copilot is maybe not as accurate, or maybe it's more long-winded or not long-winded enough when asking these questions compared to ChatGPT or Claude or whatever AI system they're using. The value that I think it brings is that data privacy and confidentiality, right? If you're using it to review business data, to put proprietary information in, you at least have some sort of form to the same level that you trust Microsoft with any other system, like your Outlook data, your Teams chats, everything else is all protected in that same avenue. And so I think that's really the value that I believe Copilot brings is by being able to give you that same functionality, you know, uh, hopefully at the same pace, but maybe even it's in a more limited context. It still provides a lot of value because it has the ability to access context and source of our already existing Microsoft information. And so I think a key point to kind of highlight here is right is what I was just specifying. Using at least from how I'll discuss it and how I view things, I think of things in two forms, context and source. So context is when, if you're using the 365 Cloud Suite today, you probably already see this, right? You're in Outlook, you're in Word, Excel, you have a little Copilot button if you have it enabled, and you see this thing, how can you interact with this document? How can you, do something, do X, Y, Z? And so what it's doing is that it's looking within the context of whatever system you're working on, and then it's able to provide you some sort of, Gen AI value. The other, definition of that source is, repositories of information. So Microsoft documentation, open web information, SharePoint. All these things are sources that Copilot can leverage in order to present data to uh, the end user. The key principle for this that I believe is very important is both of these are in scope of the user's existing rights. So if you have a user that has a confidential document open or has something sensitive or potentially would be sensitive, but that isn't marked as so, I think the main thing that comes out of that is you're giving it carte blanche to be able to do whatever. That data should still and that transaction history should still be secure, but you're spoon feeding information that would potentially be confidential into to Copilot, and if there's no DLPs or DSPM controls in it, it has the ability to provide its own analysis. And the same scope of the user's source attributes is that if a user has full unabated access into a SharePoint repository that has is maybe full of confidential information or maybe has limited confidential information within that site structure, that's all free game to Copilot. So really the whole idea is really kind of discussing around, what is my user's access rights? If I'm going to put users on Copilot, what data do they already have access to? Because that's going to be put under a magnifying glass when, Copilot has access to be able to, pull that information out of there. And that key point is because it's based on those user entitlements. And so a lot of times when I've heard people struggling with this, or especially when they have a bad taste in their mouth, right? Oh, I don't like Copilot because it puts all this, it pulls a lot of information that a user shouldn't have access to. I was like, well, that may be true, but you have a data security problem, not an AI problem. Copilot is only looking at that information that user has access to. Therefore, so if you have full unabated access, your SharePoint administrator has maybe gotten a little bit lazy, or permissions have been misaligned, and you're giving everyone full unrestricted rights to SharePoint sites, to document repositories, to just general cloud information. That's going to be all free game for Copilot to take advantage of, for better and for worse. So I think one thing too that I have a lot of conversations about, especially with usually kind of out of band, right? We're doing some sort of engagement, and they're like, "Oh, what do you know about Copilot?" And like, okay, well, what do you want to talk about? Why are you interested in it? And really, that's where I think the benefits that it comes to our clients, especially having running an IT services business and being able to kind of facilitate these types of conversations, I think gives us a lot of credence, creates a lot of value, and quite frankly, I think it's a much more fun conversation than it is about printer issues and now access points and a lot of the mundane operations things. This is something I'm a little bit more forward leaning that I think really steers people to being invested in what IT can bring versus the traditional IT services. So being able to create documentation, be able to analyze data, all that is really great value for Copilot for our clients as well as us internally for MSPs. Um, a couple of my favorite things done is doing documentation, right? I don't know if you've experimented this in the past. Maybe you've done it for yourself or troubleshooting, right? You create some sort of KV. A client says, "Hey, I need to have can you provide me a write up of how to set up Outlook on my iPhone?" Well, you can go into really any AI, but in Copilot specifically, it's great because it leverages a lot of the Microsoft source information. So you can say, okay, how do you set up Outlook on iOS? And you're able to put that into Copilot. It gives you, whatever, a 4 or 5 step plan, call it with bullet points that makes it concise. You can kind of tailor it with an AI. You can just pull it out and format it to your own look and feel, and then send that off to your client. And that saves you, very much time. And that's much more accurate, much more professional. And I think that's a great value add either from external perspective or internally for your own internal knowledge base. Scripting and code capabilities are really, really phenomenal. Now, I, for one, would just like if probably any of us here would never just trust running a script directly from the internet, right? I think there's still the whole validation that needs to be done. But in the end, like if you want to create a PowerShell script that returns, 90-day users coming from the Colorado location, sure, you may have all the capabilities to be able to write that out, but you can probably get 90% plus of the way there by putting that into Copilot, getting the results, reviewing it, testing the data and making sure that it looks the way that you want, and then be able to expand on that. So there's a lot of value that it can do from an internal IT thing. One of the other things that I just personally, as a side note, that I found is I've been using it to look at a lot of unstructured data. A great form of this is that if you've ever done like a debug log, it's you get a 3 megabyte text file of 77,000 lines, and each one of those lines has a specific error code or specific thing. You're able to I pull that information over into Copilot and it says, okay, find the error logs and summarize this for me. And it's able to go into some of these application service logs or some of these specific data sets, and is able to kind of point me to the problem much more quickly than me going line by line or searching for arbitrary keywords. So being able to summarize that even unstructured data is just a huge value add, much less being able to provide meeting notes and things um, for clients and internal use. I think at an external level, right, is it's a value add service. So a lot of times when I'm having conversations with clients, working with the CSP or working with their general IT team, um, this is all out of band, right? This is an out of band project, so it's a way to capitalize on project hours and revenue and different things, especially for MSPs that are already doing a CSP relationship. You can sell more subscriptions to certain software. I believe at certain levels, depending on the volume and the current partner standing, there's different incentives you get from the Microsoft standpoint. So there's a lot of things you can do is to kind of capture like a revenue stream, which is really what moves the needle for us. But I think outside of that, right, is you're talking about technology advancement versus remediation. So you're bringing them a solution, to problems that they may or may not know they have. And so I feel like that puts us in a matter of respect. And as a consultant, my favorite thing is consulting, right? I want to be able to solve problems. I want to talk through solutions. I want to be able to bring something newer to the element that wouldn't typically be present. And so I think these types of conversation, gives us the ability to say, okay, yeah, we're not just focusing on the run of the mill stuff. We're forward leaning. We're trying to, bring solutions to the team. So I think that's, really what that stands is kind of that point of presence of like, we know this stuff. We know how to help you. We want to, improve on what you have. So as we kind of wrap this up, because I do know we want to get into a discussion and hash this out a bit. I have highlighted some of the things that I recommended, right? So kind of in these green boxes here is really some core things that I want to really consider and that I recommend to a lot of my clients. And then kind of these bottom boxes here are more, you know, uh, run of the mill prereq type stuff that I highly recommend. Some of this is even a core requirement. But to kind of just skim off the top, right? The conditional access, and mobile security and data discovery. So while none of these are a core requirement in order to get Copilot enabled, I do believe it's very valuable. One of my philosophies that I always tell my clients as we're working through this stuff is I'm not going to sell you a door locking project if I find you're leaving your windows open, right? I'm not going to send some whiz bang utility. I'm not going to put something in place that, has a big presence when you have, obvious gaps, maybe smaller, maybe just due to quantity, they still present a lot of risk. And so I don't want to, push that out. I don't want to encourage anybody over to Copilot if they have poor security posture elsewhere, because everything's going to compound. So one of the things that I recommend, especially if you're having conversations with clients and you're not comfortable or confident in their external threat mitigation through conditional access and mobile device management or mobile application management, I highly recommend putting that into place. And then the data discovery is something depending on you know how comfortable you are with the client's environment and what they have in SharePoint and these repositories and what they don't. But being able to discover that sensitive content and figure out what are their weaknesses, right? Do they have an HR folder that maybe that is public so that they can share things like payroll calendars and PTO policies and things like that? But does that also have employee salary information, performance reviews, things that maybe not everyone needs to have access to within that folder? Being able to answer those types of questions. Once we are able to kind of answer those types of questions, we can kind of figure out, okay, a DLP strategy. So one of the easiest things I recommend for a lot of my business premium, customers is at least getting an idea of creating, at least two paths, sensitive versus general. So when by default, if everything's general, it's free game, right? There's no sensitive information. Copilot, the user can, freely do with this as they please. Once we create a sensitivity label of confidential, restricted, excuse me, however you want to define it, that's when we can start really scoping things really at a kind of a binary level, at least to say, okay, Copilot, end user, free game. If you want to use anything general, that's public knowledge. When you're doing things like board meetings or performance reviews and you mark those sensitive, you can create policies and exclusions to say, okay, even if the user has access rights, I don't want any of this data that is found in these documents to be subject to analysis or AI use. So I think that just brings a lot of value with not a lot of work. Now, if you want to get into automations and things with Purview, you do have to get more into licensing, which I can kind of expand on a little bit. But the other half of it, right, is just doing permissions audits, and so a lot of this stuff is, you know, uh, not as glorious as implementing some of the tools and everything else, but it is valuable for the clients. And a lot of times when I've had clients, ask about Copilot, I start highlighting some of this stuff, and we start doing a bit of data discovery, and they kind of just get shell shocked of saying, okay, we had no idea that we had, this was the standing of our cloud environment. This was the standing where everybody was just given full access to all this information. We didn't realize that it meant everything, right? And so a lot of times, that puts the project a bit on pause, but it's bringing a lot of value into it because we're highlighting things that they didn't know. So I do think it's worth, collaborating, going into the SharePoint Admin Center, working with clients, figuring out, what data sites they have, what do those scopes look like, and then being able to determine, do you make a no go on that, or do you just have a little bit of cleanup? And then finally, in that is really around licensing. So my main thing that I recommend is, and I pretty much encourage this to every customer I'm doing an engagement on, because a lot of those top three things I need are all covered with Business Premium in E3. But at a minimum, I'm recommending, a lot of clients I'm working with before we have an engagement is to have massive proliferation of Business Premium or E3 for all the users, because that's going to give us the ability to keep them in licensing scope for conditional access, be able to deploy mobile device management policies, mobile application management policies, and the ability to kind of tune DLP configurations. So at a core level, being able to start with that Business Premium E3 license, we leave, we have all the capabilities that we need for these optional and prereq, systems, and then we can kind of, go over that. There's certain features like, if you're familiar with Microsoft Purview, or that's really kind of their ecosystem for doing data security. They actually launched a DSPM for AI, so data security posture management for AI. That's really centered around Copilot readiness and data discovery. So when you have that, you go into Business Premium, you have a DSPM for AI module that has some limited information. So that's a great way for you to get kind of a litmus test on how, what the overall posture for this environment is. And then depending on how complex or, how many results come out of that, then, you can start pivoting and say, okay, yeah, maybe we need to add, Purview E5 licenses or Purview Suite licenses to be able to gain those extra features to be able to automate some of this stuff. And so that's really where I think this starts to take off is, doing that data discovery, making sure the environment's in good standing, and then kind of launching into kind of a full scale implementation once the data security is right and tested to the client's environment. So that's all I have. Appreciate everyone's time. I think we will go ahead and just kind of jump into open Q&A, and I'm happy to discuss anything we've talked about with Purview, as well as anything with conditional access, tenant hardening, whatever we need to go to complement that.
Excellent. Great job, Seth. And I do want to open it up to any questions that anybody has, any burning questions. Does anybody want to jump in right away?
So when you were talking about, I think you used the term labels, do you have clients like, so the way I've been doing it is I create SharePoint sites based on who should have access to it.
Hmm.
So I create an accounting site, an HR site, company documents site. And that way it's really clear who should have access to everything on down. Are you saying that you've set up clients where they've got like a human resources site and you've used labels to leave documents in there that some of the people that are members of that site could not either have access to or allow Copilot to have access to?
Yeah, essentially. And so I think that's a great example, right? With like an HR team, right? And so typically, depending on, the organization and the structure, you got a, 4-person, HR team, let's call it. And they have a data repository that has everything HR related from benefit plans, public information to the company to, um, employee reviews, FMLA documents, things like that. And so depending on, the access rights you may need to configure, maybe everybody in that HR team needs to have access to everything in there, whether it's personal reviews or, certain information. But what I think the data labeling gives is kind of twofold. So yeah, giving you some granularity on who should have access rights, but it also will give you the ability to create DLP policies to where you can say, yes, this is not free game for you to use Copilot, but you can also create DLP policies and purview to say, if this document is found confidential, you can't email this outside of, my domain, right? You can start using that to provide value and other avenues outside of what's purview. So yeah, sure, create a data label. You can't ingest employee performance reviews into your Copilot engine. But if that once that label and that framework is already created, you can then pivot off of that and move that into DLP policies to say, okay, yeah, you can't restrict this to end users. You can't send this document to people that aren't authorized to receive confidential information. So that's kind of the full scale value add of doing data labels outside of user access rights, but being able to define how that document is proliferated or not proliferated through an organization.
That's really interesting. So I've never played with that before. If they're syncing a document library to their computer via OneDrive, if they have a document that has one of those policies applied and they try to drag it to an email, the DLP is going to kick in and spot that even though they're using OneDrive and Outlook, that document shouldn't be allowed to do that.
So there's a couple ways to it. So at a core level with DLP, especially when we're talking like business premium, right? And you have data labels, you have the ability to create policies. And so I call that, I don't know specifically the term, but I like to think of it because it makes sense to me as gateway DLP, right? As it goes from one landing zone into the other, how do you want to interact with it? So you can say something like, yes, if you drag it over to your email and you're going to fire this off to another person and it's going to go one gateway to the other, then yes, how do you want to interact with it? With E5 and some of the more advanced licensing, you actually can do endpoint DLP where you can actually control, can they even save this library to their C drive, period. And so there's certain avenues depending on the licensing scheme that you can do. So endpoint DLP gives you a lot more functionality, but you're really only going to get that functionality at an E5 license, rather at least, point value, business premium, and doing gateway DLP is going to mitigate more of the risk from external threats and people oversharing information. Rather, endpoint DLP is going to focus on are people treating this sensitive information as according to policy, rather they choose to or not. It's going to force things to happen in a certain way.
Hmm.
Make sense? Or any other questions on
Yeah,
that?
I'm wondering it
The wheels are
myself, my
spinning.
own. Yeah, I'm thinking to myself like, okay, so let's say I copy the document out of OneDrive and copy it to a USB key, and then I take the
Endpoint
USB
DLP would
key.
not let you.
Okay. Um, yeah, because I was wondering like then if I copied it from the USB to an email and tried to email it, is it going to recognize that document? Like, is the metadata still
Yep.
part of the properties of the document? So,
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the beauty of it, and so that's really kind of the campaign of it. Is that way I think of it is when we have a gateway DLP, a user doesn't have access, to send this out. So, like say, you have a confidential document, you only allow confidential data to be, circulated to internal employees. You try to fire that off to like your personal Gmail or whatever, it's going to stop you, right? And it's going to, and you can notify the admin. And then and something you can also bypass. Say, okay, yeah, Mike needs to email this out to his personal Gmail. I'll allow this exception. But there's nothing stopping you into, certain areas on mitigating the threat to where if somebody copies that to their downloads folder and copying it to a C drive or to a network drive, it's all going to be within the cloud, purview. Once you have endpoint DLP, it also analyzes the file contents locally within the operating system. So you can say if this is confidential, you can't store this on a C drive. You can't download it locally. You can't, manipulate it outside of this, this file sync, OneDrive library. You can't move it over to a new. So that's really kind of the benefit there. So it's really more of, with anything with DLP is how far do you want to go into the, insider threat risk mitigation um, profile, and how deep do you want that to go, and do you have the money to, secure it with the licensing you need to, pull that off.
Yeah. Yeah. Because of the way I usually set up the permissions on the sites, the only issue that I've run into is when an employee works their way up in the company. So they
Mhm.
start off as a receptionist, then 15 years later, they're now in HR, and now they have access to all of the documents about themselves and their performance reviews as when
Yeah.
they were still a receptionist. And like,
Well, if you're
yeah.
doing this, I mean, so you can do this, depending on how you're doing it in Active Directory, right? If you're doing a lot of the control security groups, there's a lot of third-party tools that do that. But if you do this a lot more at the cloud level, there's certain, licensing SKUs with the Entra ID governance and other things that you can put into place that actually has built-in access reviews. So you can actually configure access reviews directly in 365 to where if that metadata changes, so if Susie Q is in a, one group and then she moves to a different group, then she can that information would be presented to an admin to say, hey, we had an access rights change. Do you want to approve this change, or do you need to make
Mm.
modifications on this user's entitlements?
That's cool. Yeah, I mean that's huge from a perspective of things that just get overlooked, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so easy where there is that type of change in a permissions, those permissions don't change the way they should. And that just puts the business at huge risk.
Yeah, and I think too that's interesting is what Mike was getting at is when we create the data labels and we codify that document. So if you have an HR document that is not codified and that is sensitive, and the user has access to the HR folder and the public folder, and for whatever reason they decide to do, they move it to the public folder. Well, if you have all these special permissions in HR who can and can have access, but they take a document out of that and move it to a public repository, well, now it's free game. But if you take that document and you codify it as a confidential document, you can limit the capabilities of where they can put that document, period, much less that's going to travel with the document. So when they go to, if they try to upload it, it may, depending on DLP policy, it may not allow them. But regardless, it's going to provide that same metadata context to if they upload it to a public, it's going to treat it according to how you define what access rights for that document, and however it leaves the organization, or however Copilot chooses to interact with it.
Yeah. Other
Are you
questions? Oh, go ahead, Mike. Perfect.
are you familiar with the promos that are going on through like PAX 8, let's say, for I think it's through March.
Some of them, yes.
So you're talking about the different licensing. Um, most of my clients are either on business standard or premium. Is
Mhm.
there a license that includes Copilot at a discount, or are you just
Yep.
adding the Copilot on and paying the nearly $30 a month more?
So yeah, I believe that there is actually a pretty nice incentive for Business Premium Plus Copilot add-on. That's a separate SKU. That's a
Okay.
bundle for that. But depending on like if they already have Business Premium, you would have to do kind of a bit of an analysis and see within their current subscriptions. But the short answer is yes, there is a bundle subscription that I believe is offered at a discount, as well as for Business Premium users, so users under 300, there is um, a, a price break for this just an additional add-on for Business Premium or for Copilot that it does have incentives to have a price discount.
Okay.
So on that note, I think most MSPs are all over the board. Some might be working with their clients with Copilot. Some, may have not even touched the conversation whatsoever. Some might not even be using Copilot internally, which, in my opinion, is a huge problem because, you can't sell what you're not using.
Right.
And what are your recommendations for an MSP today to start introducing the conversation to their clients and talking through the value proposition of what this can do for them?
Use it. Just depending on their environment, right? And the way that I see this is, if because I've been using Copilot for well over a year and stuff, really since it became available for partners to use. And I was there kind of in the early days and like, yeah, this is cool, but this really isn't bringing a lot of value compared to some of the other Chat GPTs and open
Yeah,
LLMs that we were doing. But now it's the only system I really use. It's gotten just as it's functional for what I need. It has all the stuff that I need to be able to use it for. So just by eating my own dog food, so to say, I've
yeah,
learned a lot about the platform. Now I'm at a privilege because I'm consulting for myself. I have my data and everything else. I don't really have to worry about segregation of information as much, even
right.
if I do. But what I think I would recommend if you're an MSP in a leadership position or you have some sort of carry weight to be able to define how you're going to pursue this go to market solution, you probably have the ability to turn on Copilot today and like I said, all it's going to do is whatever your rights are today, it's just going to compound that. And so if you're a shareholder, stakeholder in the company, you're an executive, you're probably going to have access to a lot of things that you need to have access to. And there's really not going to be any surprises with that. But I think what I would recommend is at least getting that into those power users that are privileged, getting it in their hands, having them use it, having them really kind of explore it. And one of the things that you can actually do when you go into Copilot and you go through kind of that admin center, you can actually see the adoption metrics. So if you say, okay, yeah, I want to throw out 10 Copilot licenses, see what happens, you can come back a week, 2 weeks in time and see, okay, how many queries is this getting? What users are actually doing this? Yeah, I'm paying $30 for Bob and he's used, it twice over the last month. I'm going to take this Copilot and give it to our, project admin or,
Right.
our project manager. So I think there's a lot of things that you can do in order to, optimize Copilot. And then once you actually have that deployed, you get a little bit more data than, you'll be able to see things that you don't normally see without purview and some of the additional things. Because one of the things that comes out of that they actually have that, DSPM, the AI readiness as part of that Copilot license. You can see, open access permissions and, certain limited information about a site. But I think that's a great way to start a discovery is, you have a client and say, hey, I'm interested, but I don't know what it's going to take. Go to that CIO, go to, somebody who is going to be making that decision, put the Copilot license for them, see how they view and how they feel it. But that's also going to unlock that capability for you to be able to see, some content discovery and open access permissions to be able to provide them and say, yeah, you've got 19 sites that have full unabated access, and these six have potentially confidential documents. Yeah, we can help you expand this coverage and expand the the pilot program, but we really need to be able to work with you on getting these access rights it's going to take us XYZ of billable hours. Do you want to proceed? And I think that's a mutual interest. Getting that proof of concept, getting it in their hands helps them navigate the waters, but it also unlocks the tools for you to be able to do a discovery that's valuable for you to be able to determine, okay, how long is this going to take us to do this right?
So how about in the area of, as you're going to a client, rolling this out, um, and I think it depends on the size of the organization, whether it's somebody that's small, 5, 10 employees versus somebody that's 35, 50 or more.
Yeah.
Do you recommend doing pilot groups? Do you recommend rolling out across the board? And if you answered that earlier, I do apologize, but I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everyone needs a Copilot license, but I do believe the users that specifically ask for it do, right? Like
Mhm.
if there is general interest, and I think that's kind of a thing too. It's not really, it's more of the soft side of IT change management, but like, surveying is that if we were to implement Copilot, how many people would actually use it? And if you just have people that say, you can give me a license and throw it on my desktop, but I'm never going to use it, then there's not a lot of value. But if you
Right.
have people that are interested and, or at least they say they're interested, as we all know, there's people that say they want it because so and so got it, but they never use it. That's how you
Yeah.
can kind of correlate that with that adoption metric. So you've got, 10 users at an organization, these 4 or 5 really want it, after a month or two, you see that go from 5 to maybe 2 people, have a conversation with them and say, okay, do you guys still want to do that? And maybe that can kind of change your scope and how much work you want to do. If you're executive, your CEO and the CEO's assistant are the only ones that want to have access to it. You don't really need to do a full scale SharePoint, permissions, mitigation versus if you have, a larger company where massive multi departmental roles and access rights want access, you need to tune the environment, as such. But I really think getting that survey out, and doing a query of who's interested and then matching that to how many people are actually using it. That's where you can get, you know, the optimization because it is a pricey license, for people that
Right.
aren't using it. And that's the answer I think Microsoft is really giving is being able to include that type of telemetry of, okay, who's actually engaging with Copilot.
What's that portal under to see the telemetry of who's using it?
If you go into the Microsoft Admin Center and go under Copilot, there's actually, and then you get to it there, and then I believe under Purview, under the DSPM for AI, there's also like a card or a widget in that module that illustrates it.
Okay.
And so one thought was, when you take a look at, the time is now, essentially. I mean, because, you got a lot of people that, are, been playing with ChatGPT because it's been out there. I think the longer that an MSP waits to, start introducing Copilot, getting it implemented, people could get set in their ways. And we've already had conversations where, MSPs have had, businesses come and say, "Hey, I want you to, do some type of integration of ChatGPT with our SharePoint, et cetera, et cetera."
Right,
And it's like, wait a minute, let's slow down, back up the truck.
right.
Um, so I think, what are some of your recommendations of don't delay, just do it.
Well, I think it really depends on the organizational stance and risk tolerance, right? If you've got you're providing services to, you know, um, a 9 person to 12 person landscape company that just doesn't have a lot of value and proprietary information stored in the cloud, then they just have a lower risk tolerance than if you're providing this for a legal firm, right?
Right.
And so, but the legal firm is going to probably have a lot more value in being able to use these types of systems. So it's, there's some sort of value trade-off and proposition, and there's also kind of a target audience. But what I think, I recommend and, kind of engaging the conversation is depending on what you have in place, because the hardest part about it is just the discovery, right? Like if you have content filtering and DNS and you have some sort of tap into the network pipe to be able to determine how many people are going to chat GPT. I think that's one of the things that's funny is when, and I've only seen this in happenstance when just having a conversation organically about, oh, should we go Copilot or not? And it's like, well, what's your concern about people, using these free LLMs? And they're like, data security, data privacy, what are they loading? It's like, well, go into your Meraki, go into your DNS filter, go to your OpenDNS. How many queries are you getting for ChatGPT? How many queries do you see this? And, you see over a 30-day time, you're getting 250 hits on chatgpt.com. You may need to say, wow, this is way bigger than what I thought it was, and
Right.
so I think it depends on, different organizations and what your capabilities are. But if you have, you know, as the adage goes, right, you can't improve what you don't measure. So if you want to
Yeah.
improve adoption, you want to improve security and posture around it, figure a way that you can kind of track this and see how many people are doing it. And then once you have this system in place, again, I recommend kind of nailing that coffin shut is by putting some sort of, you know, cloud security, posture management system, some sort of CASB program that's going to say, okay, you know, you can't get to ChatGPT. Start blocking this stuff and give them, say, hey, you want AI, you want to have these resources, you got to go through, Copilot, you got to go through our program and our steps in order to safely facilitate this. So I think, that's the thing is these things aren't um, they're not a plug and play solution. Really, these come with more of a framework around AI and generational, LLM. It's like we wouldn't create an email account today for someone without MFA and no, phishing protection, right? Same thing with
Right.
AI. We shouldn't grant someone access to very capable systems that are valuable, but not, including the right protections. But yeah, definitely try to figure a way that if they're interested, if you can find a way to measure, even just simply how many queries are going to the site, that can really give them a number of, oh yeah, this is bigger than what I thought it was, or there is likely value of our teams doing that, because that's the other thing too. People are using AI whether they're upfront about it or not. And so
Right.
the easiest way from us in IT is to be able to kind of spell this out and put pure numbers of, I don't know who's told you they're using AI, but I can at least tell you 250 people over the last 30 days has hit
Right.
GPT for some reason.
And that's actually great data because, when you go to, decision makers, you're having your technology business review and you're starting to talk about Copilot. And if they were to say, well, I don't know that this is a value for us, and you come loaded with data of, hey, look, these are the hits on Gemini, these are the hits on ChatGPT. Um, I think that might enlighten them and that conversation completely can change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest value when it comes to me and my philosophy of consulting is when I can ask the client questions they don't have an answer to, I'm winning, right? And so
Right.
if I go to you and say, do you know if your people are using AI? And they say, I don't know. And I say, well, I know 250 people over the last 30 days does. Do you know what they're putting into it? Oh, I don't know. Well, let's talk about how we can fix that, right? I think that's really the value there. So yeah, coming, armed to the teeth, with very
Yeah.
minimal knowledge at the end of the day, just at least kind of paints a picture of, you know, potentially how much proliferation is out there and
Right.
what are the unknown threats to, using the system today and why do we need to justify it? Because that's the other thing too. It does take, depending on the environment, it does take some considerable effort to get this right. But we wouldn't throw an email system and we wouldn't create a 365 tenant for someone and not put any security on it whatsoever because there's just too much risk out there nowadays to facilitate that. Same way that I think with Copilot, I won't put somebody in AI and have all these features at somebody's beck and call without introducing the proper security.
So,
Seth, oh,
oh, go ahead,
I'm
David.
sorry, Seth. I just wanted to ask a quick question. When you do these rollouts with Copilot, um, do you then block access to ChatGPT and some of the others?
Yeah. So that's what I was saying is, and depending on the complexities and the network stack of the organization. So the easiest way that I recommend it is when we're talking about at the gateway, right? We're going to go into their DNS filter, or they're going to go into whatever service that they're using, and we're just going to put a chatgpt.com block, or we're going to, block the
What?
URLs for a lot of these no ones. And that's kind of the path of least resistance of just being able to just say, okay, yeah, you don't have access to that site now. You got to go through Copilot.
And
But
what kind of pushback comes out of that is
unwarranted, because eventually at some point they've signed a check to say, hey, we want you to implement Copilot and get everyone in there.
yeah.
And so, like, yeah, if you want to spend 10 plus thousands of dollars of me implementing this system, and you want your users to be able to circumnavigate our hard work, be my guest. But otherwise, you paid for it,
Yeah.
you might as well use it.
Yeah, that's a great question, David.
Yeah,
Have
definitely.
are any of you on have you migrated from the old Microsoft Action Pack to the new offering, and does it include Copilot for any of the licenses you get for internal use?
I'm at the second tier. I forget what they call it, because I remember the action pack and I can remember those with gold, silver, and everything else. But it's like because they have the basic tier and then they have the tier plus, which is like you get like the 15 business premium. I don't think you get. I don't quite remember. I've had my subscription for years, even before that existed. But I think at least in one of the other tiers you do get one. But you know, it's I think the value is there, but you get a lot
Yeah,
of other.
I've definitely found the value. Like you hit on it when you said to um, transcribe a Teams meeting.
Yeah,
When I'm meeting with my clients, I tell them if you have 1 hour long meeting a month and you have it transcribe and then generate meeting minutes, it'll pay for itself the time it saves you from trying to do that manually. So that's been how I've been selling it. But for the rest of the staff, if they're not in a lot of meetings, they're not generating presentations and stuff, um, I don't I don't see the value.
right.
Like it's not as easy of a win. They have to define something they're doing in their job where AI could be helpful, and then it probably makes sense.
Yeah, and I've seen that too, even just personally, because having it on my tenant. And so sometimes, like, I have, like, a lot of times, like, I'll have one where I'm meeting with the IT team or certain stakeholders. And they're like, yeah, our CIO can't be there. Like, oh, well, do you guys mind if I co-pilot this, and then I'll send your CIO the transcript and they can see the action items and who owns what? And they're like, yeah, that's awesome. I don't have to do that. And so, like, I think that's an absolute
Yeah.
value add is, you're having these meetings, you're having people that can't attend. And I mean, quite frankly, I love those synopses. They're amazing because there's a lot of times to where, especially when we have 4 or 5 people in here, and I say, okay, Mike, I want you to do this, or hey, I need this from you by next week. Copilot's going in there and say, hey, this is your action item to get before this date, and it provides it provides a summary to me, or it provides it to the attendees, and everyone has a clear, objective. Action item plan. I think that's a massive win for these busy teams.
So another question I have for you is, and I have my thoughts on this, but I just want to open this up as a general question. Should Copilot readiness be positioned as a project, an ongoing service, or both?
So it's a project, but I think there's ways depending on the scope and just the depth of the work, because a lot of times, like, when I'm doing stuff is like I have a project, or like I'm going to work with a client on doing a full, like, tenant hardening, right? So we're going to go there, we're going to turn some things off, we're going to create some conditional access policies, we're going to move things to Intune and mobile device management. It's going to take us a fair bit of time. We're going to probably take 2 or 3 months on that journey to get from where we started to where we want to be. And so I think, depending on budget and everything else, you can, figure out how you want to allocate that workload. And, it needs to be spread around. And, I think if you have the capabilities to say, okay, yeah, we're going to sell you a project, and we're going to capitalize it, and it's going to take us, call it 4 months or so, by all means. If it's a small team and or small budgets and they don't have the capabilities to do that, say, okay, we're going to sell you a 6 month readiness project, and we're going to bill you XYZ monthly, and we're going to progress on getting this stuff done. I've worked on some engagements like that where we've kind of divvied it up over a longer term, just because it makes it more bite sized depending on the resource and capabilities. But I think to sum up the question, it is a project. But I think depending on the amount of work involved, especially because it is a collaboration project. Don't get me wrong. Like, and I think that's the
Right.
biggest thing about this is that if we want to migrate, your DNS, or we want to build you a new, Active Directory server, you don't need the client, like you do to say, okay, who in the HR team should have access to this folder? Who should have this? So there's a lot of running around and consulting and things that you need to do to get that right. And so that's where I'm thinking the long tail of the project isn't the button clicking, it's more of the collaboration and getting the right stakeholders involved to make the decision for the needs of the business. So I think that's kind of the way that I see it being more of a long-tailed conversation. And that's the thing. If you're
Right.
if you're going to have someone in Copilot, or getting ready, it's going to take them a few months even to do it by the book, depending on if they're you know a nominal client with even half a terabyte of SharePoint data.
Yeah. Because I mean, there is the whole, thought process of, cleaning up the past versus putting guardrails on for the future.
Yeah.
Um, but let's face it, this is new. Copilot is still new, and it's something that I 100% agree truly is a project. I do think from an ongoing perspective, ongoing support, I think there's still a differentiating factor here of the difference between just some general Copilot support and future projects of it because we might implement Copilot for them. It's a project, and then ongoing they might have a general question, a help desk question of hey, I was just doing this and it doesn't seem to be working. I think that's just normal troubleshooting. But then if they say hey, this has been working great, but we also want to have it do A, B, C, and D, well, that turns into a new project. I don't think
Yeah.
that's general support.
Well, and that's the thing that I've had a lot of conversations with some of my clients, depending on whether it's in the scope of Copilot or anything else in the work that we do. It's a transformation project. And so we're transforming a part of their environment to, be AI ready or doing this. But like, we were discussing earlier, with you, Mike, is when you start implementing sensitivity labels and you get that in there. Well, you can also pivot that work that you're doing for Copilot into DLP, and you can say, okay, now that we have this in place, we can pivot over to doing DLP, and we can control who has access to this, how they want to share this information. So the transformation work that you do can pay dividends in other areas. And so that's kind of where I was saying it's hard to just black and white that question because yeah, it is a project and it does have a myopic goal, but the work that you're doing also has value for, data security, compliance reasons and everything else. And so, if the client and the account teams are kind of in lockstep, you can say, hey, the value that we're going to bring into this project has other areas into this. Why don't we add something onto the agreement to do, data security posture management? Why don't we set up DLP controls? Why don't we do things out there? So, because the work that we're going to be doing is setting the framework to be just as successful in other areas. So why not capitalize on both? And, they get even more value in the long term.
Yeah. We are at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Um, for everybody that was listening here today, I am going to talk to Seth about coming back. We have his, I'm just trying to find his the profile information I was just looking at. His background. Um, Oh boy, I lost where I had that here, Seth. Oh, here it is. Some of the other areas that I'd love to bring Seth back for is he focuses on Microsoft Defender Suite, Entra ID, conditional access in MFA, Purview, as well as Intune. And I think each of those topics are would be great. And so I'll be reaching back out to you, Seth, for that. So Seth, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. And hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And we'll see you guys on Friday. Take care, everybody. Thank
Yeah,
you.
likewise. Thank you
Take
all.
care.